Hello, and welcome to Draft Day. My name is John Fleming. I am one of the co-hosts of Draft Day, joined once again, and always, by Jason Bradshaw, the other co-host of Draft Day. How are you doing, Jason?
Oh, John, I'm doing great, man. I'm so ready for this draft or
Yeah,
something. It feels weird to kind of like get back in the swing and then go like, we're not going to redraft again. So, but I like it. I think it's variety is the spice of life, or
okay.
something like
Well,
that.
I do have some news to break to you about this draft, which is that I don't have any notes prepared, and I don't know what I'm going to do. April Fools!
Oh my gosh, you got me.
I got you. I zapped you there.
Man.
All right, this is...
Obviously, you're listening on audio, guys. Like, I just turned white when John said that.
And I'm actually like running around in circles right now, just kind of like doing like the little stack Kobe shot kind of thing. It's pandemonium has broken out, and we have found our April Fool, and it is Jason.
Oh man. As
It
I
is
sit
April
here and just do the Alonzo morning,
I can see what you're doing, and I assume anybody who would
yeah,
appreciate the reference can see what you're doing in their minds.
yes, just if you don't just search Alonzo morning in any GIF like search tool,
You
you'll
get like
find
100 results of the same thing.
the same thing.
Yeah. But it is April Fool's Day, and what that means is that we have an April Fool's episode of Draft Day. So unlike our previous two episodes that were not... It's two, right? We did the movie draft and the St. Louis draft that were not of a specific sports draft.
But we did NFL in between there, didn't we?
Yeah, but I'm saying as far as ones that are not a specific like year
not a
fill in
specific,
the...
not a specific redrafting of sports
Yeah.
draft. Yeah.
So unlike the two that were not redrafts of sports draft, this is still a sports episode. But what we are going to do is, instead of drafting the best players, we are going to simply draft the biggest busts in the history of drafts. So this is the format of this episode. We'll just kind of see how long we feel going. We played pool earlier today to determine a priority for the drafting. I won the game. And because I don't feel like drafting any of these people, I am deferring the first pick to you, because that is the nature of how this deserves to be.
Yeah, I think, and of course, in true fashion, I would like to, for everybody who's rooting for me to finally win a game of pool, this was by far the closest I've been.
We
were down to the 8 ball.
I was a little concerned that, like, because I had told you that I was going to do this, I was a little bit concerned that, like, my one time of promising being magnanimous, it was going to result in me not actually winning.
Yeah, it was. I was riding high off of winning a couple of games of actual pool that I was playing with coworkers at a work function where I had to go out of town for a few days this week. So I thought I could do it, and then I got cocky and
you flew too close to the sun, and as a result, you will now have to pick first. So the thing about for anybody, I can't imagine there's anybody listening that doesn't know what term draft bust means. It basically just means guy that was drafted like reasonably high, who did not turn out to be as good as was expected. The term can kind of be applied to a few different types of guys. Sometimes there's guys who get hurt. Sometimes there's guys that are just like huge head cases that don't develop for that reason. Sometimes it's not so much that the player's bad, but just that the circumstances are bad, or that there was somebody else who could have been drafted instead that it's kind of impossible for that person to shake. And like looking at the list that I do have, it's kind of a mix of those types of things. And
yeah, I'd agree. I'd say if any piece that maybe what I lean more heavily towards, it's sort of almost the idea for us that in a way started this podcast, which is like with the Eric Johnson draft, episode 2. It's you could have had this guy. Big ups to John's dog, who has alerted us that somebody else has entered his home. But
He actually hasn't. That'll be coming at some point. I think he heard somebody existing outside.
oh well, I mean, if they're anywhere within his earshot, he has every right to
Oh, he
bark and
does.
be upset.
Still gonna mute my microphone when it happens, though.
I mean, that's entirely fair.
But I'm glad you brought up Eric Johnson. I think Eric Johnson is actually just a really good example. Like, we were pretty clear during that draft, the 2006 NHL draft. It was our second episode. We were pretty clear that he was not worthy of being number one pick, but he had like a pretty long career. He's still going, of being like a competent player. If we were drafting like infinitely, I guess he would technically be considered a draft bust, but we're talking about guys who just really did not.
He'd be way down the list.
Yeah. Like, honestly, I don't recall specifically offhand from that draft. He probably wouldn't be the top pick from that draft, because even though the next few guys immediately after him turned out to be really good players, there were some guys otherwise in the first round who didn't amount to much.
Yeah, and it's, I'll say specifically too, in terms of like, especially the NHL, being somebody that enjoys the NHL a lot. When you go back to some of those early expansion drafts, like we had multiple drafts where like the top 4 guys never played a game in the NHL. And it's no fun really to talk about that kind of guy. Because too, I think, and this isn't just being, there may be some recency bias, but so much more gets made in where there's been more coverage in recent times. Like being a draft bust from the 60s, while it could exist, and we may have guys from that era, I feel like a lot of my guys are like 80s on, just because that's when the draft became a bigger thing. It's when there was more coverage. We had people ranking these people in a lot of cases, so that's at least how mine is going to skew. But
yeah, and I think that there's sort of a scale when it comes to the sport too. Because if you look at a sport like baseball, it's a lot of randomness as far as like the top guys. And honestly, if you're the number 1 overall pick and you have like, a 6-year major league career where you're okay, but then you get hurt, you're probably not really going to qualify for this, because even though you probably weren't the best player in that draft, it's just so random and so fickle. But, by the same token, like the NFL draft, there's sort of an expectation of you're getting a franchise player, so it's a little bit easier to kind of pick on those guys.
Yeah, NBA I think would be similar. If you have a top NBA pick, it's usually a guy that you're expecting to come in.
Yeah, I think with my NBA guys, I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but as far as the NBA guys on the list, very few of them are outside the top like 3 or 4 picks, because even like late lottery, if you're like the 8th or 9th pick, the expectation is, oh, this guy can be like maybe like a low end starter for you or something like that. And if you end up just being a rotation player instead of a low end starter, that's just not that much of a fall off. Probably isn't going to warrant too much criticism of the pick.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll. I think the best way to explain what a draft bust is going to be through our examples. So
yeah,
I'll let you get the ball or puck rolling.
So I will get us going here, and
I have to be honest, I'm not sure how you're going to pick here. Like, I think this is going to be a little bit more like compared to like the movie draft or compared to the St. Louis draft. I think this is going to be a little bit more to script, but I think that our rankings could vary wildly. Like, the gap between like my number 5 and my number 25 is just not that much.
Yeah, it's. I'll be honest. I more just have a listing of names, and it's going to kind of be what I'm feeling based on how the conversation's going and what my mind thinks at this moment. And it's funny because I can tell you, I've been wrestling with the decision since knowing this afternoon on number 1, and I'm going to start in the NFL. It's one of 2 guys I'm thinking about, and ultimately, like, maybe it's because we talked about another guy on an earlier episode. I'm not going to go with him. He may have been a number 2 overall pick. That is often viewed maybe as the biggest NFL draft bust of all time. I, however, am going to go to 2007 and take the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah,
Jamarcus Russell.
he was number 1 on my board, and I have no excuse not to take him because I literally just gave you the pick. But yeah, Russell is a strong choice,
and it's it's hard because I mean we may discuss it, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Obviously, I'm comparing to Ryan Leaf here.
Yeah,
Leaf was a 2nd overall. I think, right?
Yes.
But like the kicker there is the Chargers traded up to get him, I believe, with Arizona.
I think they traded up like one spot, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
like it was a swap, but there was something involved.
Yeah.
And obviously, like Peyton Manning was gone. They weren't going to get Peyton Manning. But the Raiders could have had, I mean, the next two picks are guys that are already in the Hall of Fame. Calvin Johnson and Joe Thomas were the 2 and 3. You could have had, I mean, to this day, like Calvin Johnson is the most dominant wide receiver I've ever seen play the game of football. And I've watched Jerry Rice play. I've watched Randy Moss. Like, okay, he might be close with Moss, but like,
I say it's him and Moss. They're the top two for me.
Yeah, but like in terms of just like being kind of like the first like athletic freak that I remember seeing play, Calvin Johnson is up there, and Joe Thomas just, as solid of a tackle as there was. I mean, playing in Cleveland, and the guy still, became a Hall of Famer. Like,
Easily too. It's not like wait a long time.
Yeah, and it's, there were some other guys. I don't know if, a guy like Patrick, Patrick Wilson, Darrelle Revis, also in this first round, by the way, also Hall of Famers. Like,
yeah, pretty good.
And there's a slew of other Pro Bowlers in the first round and a half. So it's, Russell played 3 years in the NFL. This is a guy that like, and I'm not a thing. Like, I remember watching him in college, and I'm like, I don't want to be like I knew, but like something to me was just like, I don't know if he's going to be able to play in the pros. But you couldn't deny what he was doing.
I didn't think he was going to be as bad as he was, but there was no part of me watching him at LSU that was like, oh, this guy's should be the number 1 overall pick. This should be the guy you build your franchise around.
Yeah. I mean, this is a dude who his completion percentages his 3 years in the NFL were 54.5%, 53.8%, 48.8%. Like, yeah. I feel like 60% is the minimum bar for an NFL starting quarterback. And to be fair, I mean, he started 25 games and played in 31. He still has 4,803 more passing yards than I have as an NFL quarterback. That's why I think
interceptions than you do too.
Yeah, he's lost a few more fumbles, all that. But I mean, obviously, a lot of his stuff stemmed from work ethic and things like that. I think he had an arrest right after he was kind of done in the NFL. I think it was like a codeine syrup arrest or something.
Yeah, he was in the purple drank era.
Yeah, so it's like, honestly, in terms of things he could have been busted for, like that doesn't even, like, the work ethic is probably a bigger deal to me than that, if I'm being perfectly honest. But
I completely agree with that.
I mean, this is when you're drafting a guy to be a thing, but it's at the same time, it's just like, yeah, that's a very Raiders pick. Like the athletic guy and all this. And then, I mean, to be fair, if Calvin Johnson had gone to the Raiders, who was going to throw the football?
Well, I was going to say, as much as Jamarcus Russell, the Raiders pick, so is Calvin Johnson. They're like both physically imposing. The thing about Jamarcus Russell is he had a really strong arm. He was and he was not like super fast, but like for a big guy fast.
He had mobility for sure.
That was kind of it. And I guess that their vision of what he was going to be would be something like what Dante Culpepper was, or like to some extent what Josh Allen is now. But he didn't. I mean, first of all, those guys went like 10th or 11th, something like that. So
yeah,
a little bit easier to justify it as an experiment. But yeah, I mean, just a guy who did nothing in the NFL, and it just seemed kind of doomed from the start. I would not have expected them to draft Joe Thomas over him. Obviously that would have worked out better. Certainly wasn't going to bang like Darrelle Revis, who I don't remember where he went, but I remember being into the Rams going for him, which they didn't. But
he was at Pitt, I want to say.
Yeah, I want to say he was I think he was the pick before the Rams went, or maybe the pick after.
He was the pick after. They took Carricker before. I remember Carricker.
who I also was pretty sour on, but he was much later in the draft than Jamarcus. So
yeah, pick before Adam Carricker. Beast mode.
Oh my god. I mean, they had Steven Jackson. They didn't really have a need for Marshawn Lynch, but yeah, that's we might have to redo that draft at some point too.
And to be fair, too, like obviously, I think they needed a quarterback, but at the same time, like, you know who the second quarterback taken in this draft was?
Was it Brady Quinn?
If what I'm reading here is right, let me make sure. I don't think, because it looks like he was the only one. Okay, it was Brady Quinn. Yeah, 22. They were the only 2 first-round quarterbacks.
Yeah, and Brady Quinn wasn't exactly a superstar in the NFL either. But
no, I mean, third quarterback taken, who probably technically had a better career than both those guys, is Kevin Kolb.
So, yeah, I would say so.
I mean, he was a starter for a few years in Arizona.
Yeah. But
but
Russell was clearly the worst of those 3, and that's not a high bar to get out of the basement of.
No.
But
yeah. Okay. And, So I will defer to you for numero dos.
So for number 2, so I have notes next to all the players that I have on my board. Obviously, like I said, Jamarcus Russell's number 1. So I refer to them in the notes as, quote, simple babies for drafting Jamarcus Russell. But my notes for this next player are, don't even write notes, just cook. Because I am going to go back to the 1996 NFL draft. He was not the number 1 overall pick. Number 1 overall pick was Keyshawn Johnson, who was a good NFL player. So the St. Louis Rams had the chance. So they had several options here. They could have just held on to the running back they had, which was future Hall of Famer Jerome Bettis. If they really wanted a running back, they could have drafted Heisman Trophy winner Eddie George. I think that would have been kind of a misallocation of resources. They could have. So the one part that I actually do have pulled up, I just pulled it up on my phone. Here's a list of a few of the guys who were drafted after the Rams selected. They could have drafted Ray Lewis. They could have drafted Marvin Harrison. They could have drafted Brian Dawkins, Terrell Owens. At this point, we're starting to get into guys who were like much later, so I don't want to hold those too much against them. The very next pick was Terry Glenn, who was not like an amazing player, but like was like a Pro Bowler. He was a much better player than the guy the St. Louis Rams drafted, which was Lawrence Phillips. So the thing about Lawrence Phillips is he is a monster, and he was known to be a monster when they drafted him. Like, I'm not gonna be like, oh, the Patriots shouldn't have drafted Aaron Hernandez or whatever. Like, the Bills shouldn't have drafted OJ or something like that. Like, no, this was like, he was suspended for most of his final year in college because he pushed his girlfriend down a flight of stairs. He was not the starter for that Nebraska team because Amon Green, who I believe I selected in our last NFL draft as a freshman, was starting over him and frankly was better than him. I don't know what the Rams were thinking here. This was just a terrible, like, even if he'd been a great guy, this was a terrible pick. It didn't make any sense at the time. He also had no work ethic. He also just kept getting arrested like once he was in the NFL. He ended up dying in prison. I don't remember what he was in prison for, but he was under charges for murdering his cellmate at one point while he was in prison. So, and again, like number 6 pick, that's why I had him below Jamarcus Russell. But just so many warning signs about this guy and just completely ignored. And like, even if they had just drafted, like, so the Rams' second pick, which was Eddie Kennison, who was not like awesome either. And they could have had Ray Lewis there too, but like, if they had drafted Eddie Kennison number 6, I wouldn't have been considering him for this spot because he was at least like a semi-productive NFL player for a minute, even if he wasn't worthy of the number 6 pick. Lawrence Phillips is just trash, and so and like most of these guys who I have on here, even if they ended up having some sort of issues in their life, like, Jamarcus Russell, I don't think he shouldn't have he had a lazy work ethic. He probably shouldn't have been doing the purple drink stuff, but like I don't like have anything like mean spirited really to say about him beyond just kind of noting those things. Lawrence Phillips is just a bad guy, and I'm not happy bringing him up, but this is the kind of draft he belongs in.
Yeah, I think obviously he was in my list of guys. Obviously, maybe it hits a little more close to home being St. Louis Rams fans. I mean,
Yeah, at the time, I didn't really. Nice. Jason's showing a Super Bowl champions hat. Lawrence Phillips, of course, was not on the Super Bowl champion Rams
no,
because they eventually came to their senses. For some reason, Dick Vermeil just thought of Lawrence Phillips as like his surrogate son, and just did like from the
yeah,
beginning, and it was a real oversight. It was
it definitely had Vermeil with him. It had the feeling of like that, like guy or
he
girl.
didn't draft him, right? Because that would have been Rich Brooks who was the coach whenever he was drafted. But
Yeah,
like for
but
some
like
reason, Lawrence Phillips was just his guy right away.
yeah, and it's like it kind of seemed like that. You know, if you're a person and you have an interest in person that you know is bad, you're like, but I could fix them. Like,
Yeah,
don't go out with them. No, but I can fix them. That like it definitely had that kind of feel to it. I mean, I looking through Lawrence Phillips. If you want to, you know, I won't rehash it. He did a lot of stuff. I think the looked like the original things. He like drove his vehicle into like 3 teenagers at a pickup game. In that's what
yeah.
started it, and then he was convicted on things with his ex girlfriend, and then eventually, you know, and went out on his own terms. It appeared in prison.
Yeah, I don't want to
So
like make jokes about
no, I'm not
suicide,
gonna make.
but
I don't.
it's a little
Yeah,
harder to have a lot of sympathy when you have this big of a rap sheet.
yeah, and it's it's you don't want to, and and it's unfortunate because really, yeah, like the first 4 picks in this draft were like they weren't bad. Like Keyshawn Johnson, Kevin Hardy, Simeon Rice, and then Jonathan Ogden at 4. Like steal for the Ravens there,
Yeah,
but
the first 2 picks in Baltimore Ravens history are Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis. There's a reason they turned a corner once they moved to Baltimore.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one. And I honestly, if we wanted to do an entire list of like St. Louis Rams draft bust, boy, we could just have a field day with that one.
Lawrence Phillips
Um,
is not the only one on my list, so
he is not the only one on my list either. But I'm going to
yeah.
switch sports. Let's get out of football for a little bit.
Okay.
And let's hit the hardwood. And, there's a lot of good guys to go with here, I think. Um, I'm not going to take maybe the most obvious one, another number 2 pick. Although,
There's
with
there's
the
a
guy,
few guys you could be talking about here, to be clear.
well, okay, the big one now. Like, but I'm gonna go with the number 1 overall guy who can take a sunrise and play bad basketball. The Candyman can. I'll take Michael
Michael.
the Candy.
Yeah.
Never averaged double digits in his NBA career. Um, who would want a guy like, oh, I don't know, Dirk Nowitzki, Vince Carter, Paul Pierce, that were all available in the
Yeah.
draft.
Paul Pierce, who was from Los Angeles, it kind of would have been perfect for them, but
it's
Dirk was the best player of that group, but Paul Pierce, like in that
yeah.
situation, and Paul Pierce was like an All-American type player in college. Michael Olowokandi was not an All-American in college.
No, he was just a very, you know, he was another one of these like physical guys. I don't know if they were hoping like I can only assume this is not just because I believe he's Nigerian, but like where they hope like I guess they wanted him to be the next Elijah like
Yeah.
kind of thing. And to be fair, Hakeem Olajuwon was also a monster player in college, so
Like
it's not
he's
like
so good. He's so good that he got drafted before Michael Jordan, and it didn't even cross my mind to put him on the board. So, like, yeah, he's pretty good. Olowokandi probably would have been a little bit closer to like Mutombo in terms of like his actual style of play because not much of an offensive threat. Like Mutombo
Yeah,
was much better at offense than Olowokandi, but Olowokandi
yeah,
was 23 years old when he got drafted number 1 overall. Just imagine that. And this was in the high schoolers getting drafted era too. He
yeah.
was
Like
23, and he first picked up a basketball at age 17. I saw in my research, which okay, sure, man.
it's crazy though. That, like there was no real like. I mean, yeah, he was out of. I think it was like Pacific. He
Just
went
University
to.
Pacific. Yep.
So like, I think maybe more known for some water sports or baseball. I think they've had some decent teams in.
Yeah.
But yeah, you look at the guys behind him. Like Mike Bibby was taken number 2 overall. Like solid NBA player, maybe not a guy that you would want at number 2 overall. Rafe LaFrance was taken 3rd. And then at
Rafe
4,
LaFrance
yeah,
also had a much better career.
agreed. Oh, and then at 4, some guy named Anton Jameson. He was pretty good.
Yeah.
Vince Carter. Number 6, honestly, could probably make this list too.
Who was number 6?
Good old tractor
Oh,
trailer.
I considered him.
I thought about him, but I'm like, yeah, he's a little. Yeah, Jason Williams, and then of course have to shout out number 8 in this list, St. Louis's own and St. Louis University's own
Barry
Barry
Hughes. Yeah.
He kind of played in the NBA, I guess, but
It was okay.
yeah, I mean, he wasn't Michael Olowokandi, but
He also wasn't
then,
Paul Pierce or Dirk Nowitzki, the next couple of guys drafted.
Yeah,
But
9-10 were Dirk and Paul Pierce, like
yeah.
that's
So I will say, I do think Olowokandi, like once it kind of became obvious that he was not worthy of the number 1 pick, I think he had a better NBA career than Jamarcus Russell had NFL career because like he like was like a decent defensive player, but he's like a
yeah,
guy you maybe draft mid first round and just hope he plays in your rotation. He was
yeah,
never going to amount to a number 1 overall pick.
yeah, and that's where it comes in. I think and that's why guys even like Eric Johnson get thrown in the conversation. It's like when you have the top overall pick, you're not expected. You're seen as a disappointment. Even if you're a 6 or 7 year journeyman in some of these sports, like that's a bust. And in this case, I mean, he played some, but like I think only played maybe close to 2 or 3 full seasons. Like he stayed in the league a long time, but like his games played his last smattering years 36, 43, 62, 32, 16, 24. Like that's maybe 2 to 3 seasons worth of games in like 6 years. So
Yeah.
it's
It's kind of weird that the Clippers over the last like decade plus have actually been like most consistent team in the NBA. Like they haven't had a losing season for a while now because for the first like basically until we were like probably like about to graduate college, they were just a disaster every
oh yeah,
year. They were just so bad.
yeah. And the Lakers were so good in a lot of those years.
Yes. All right. So with my second pick, I'm also going to go with the NBA. I'm also going to go with a big man. I am not going to go with a number 1 overall pick. I'm going to go with a number 2 overall pick. I suspect that I'm not going with the guy that you're talking about, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'm going with a guy that I pegged for a bust like when he was in college. I was like, what on earth is anyone talking about? 2009, number 2 overall pick, Hashim Thabit.
Mm-hmm.
So Hashim Thabit, for those who don't remember, played for the University of Connecticut. They were a Final Four team with him. He was their 3rd leading scorer, which probably should be a little alarming if you're the number 2 overall pick and you're 7'3" or 7'4" or whatever he was. Maybe a sign that you don't have the most polished offensive game.
Yeah.
I think that primarily he was a little bit like Olowokandi. He was viewed as mostly a defensive player, but the weird thing here is the Memphis Grizzlies already had Marc Gasol. It's not like they were like hurting for a center. They just were like,
Yeah.
this guy's so good, we have to get him. And in reality, so the pick after him was James Harden, but Harden was considered a bit of a reach at number 3, so I'll give him a pass there. Steph Curry, everybody knew who he was from college. He was like a sensation in college. And I was just like, I thought Blake Griffin deserved to be the number 1 pick in that draft. And in hindsight, I was wrong, but whatever. It's not the biggest miss I've ever had. But like, I was just like screaming, "Take Steph Curry!" Like this guy's really good.
Yeah,
Or take Ricky Rubio for that matter, who
yeah,
obviously was not an amazing NBA player, but a lot better than Hasheem Thabeet.
yeah.
Thabeet, so he as a rookie started 13 games, which is the most he ever started in his career for a season. He also had a career high in points per game with 3.1. He was a reasonably good shot blocker, like in the NBA and in college for that matter too. But that was kind of his only skill. Um, Honestly, like he would have been a fun player to draft in like the second round, which is honestly about where I would have thought to draft him, maybe late first. Like he actually probably would have been a useful role player for like I can't think off the top of my head who was a good team at that point who like maybe like the Cavs or something like that who just like getting a big man who can come off the bench and play defensively might have been useful. But for a
Yeah.
team that's like looking for a spark to build around, Hashim Thabeet was just absolutely not the right pick.
Yeah, he. I mean, and if I remember right, he was like one of those guys. He picked up basketball like late and
Yeah,
later in life.
he's kind of a similar case to Olowokandi, except that he played at a much bigger school
Much
and
bigger
was
school.
younger.
Yeah, and I mean, and I remember in college, like I remember he banked in like a three to win a game or tie a game. I forget what it was. Like, so like he had his moments. I think he's just marketable because he was big and just kind of overall seemed like a nice, happy dude. Like,
Yeah,
but he also had,
by all accounts he was a good guy. This is not like the Lawrence Phillips pick.
yeah, but ultimately it's what you do on the court. And yeah, I mean, I think he bounced around a little bit. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Was he with Indiana at one point? I think,
That sounds right, but honestly,
but I could be
he had a
confusing him with Roy Hibbert too. So I don't know.
well, he definitely was on Indiana, and
Yeah, I know
also
he
was a
was.
lot better for a
He was
minute.
much
But
better than Nasheed Thabit was. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you hit a lot of the nails on the head. He's a guy who just not good.
yeah,
And
honestly, his big kind of like marquee game in the tournament was against Mizzou. So I remember it. I remember it well, and I remember it closely. And
yep,
he had a good game, but he was just very clearly like had such superior size over any player on that. And that was a good Mizzou team, but they were like, Damari
they had
Carroll
Damari
or like
Carroll on the inside, who's what 6, who also had a better NBA career, by the way.
yeah. But he was also playing as a 2 or 3. He wasn't being expected to be
Yeah,
like a true big man in the way that like and like the beat kind of like dominated these guys because honestly, so a guy that I was wrong about coming out was Cam Newton because Cam Newton was like unbelievable and just running over guys, but I just could not for the life of me imagine him becoming like being able to run over guys in the next level. And that's kind of and the beat was like kind of the version of that actually that version came true where like he just didn't have the skills. Obviously, Cam Newton had a lot more skills as a quarterback than Hashim Thabeet did as a big man. So you win some, you lose some. I was right about Thabeet. I'm wrong often, but I take him with my number 2 pick.
yeah, I think that's certainly solid. And uh, since we talked about a lot of things, and I'm gonna stay in basketball for my next one. And it's going to be one of the more sad cases of a person. This is going to be an injury-riddled one, but they either got the best player or
Yeah.
Kevin Durant.
I knew
Uh,
we were going to be making a Two Live Crew parody song reference at some
yeah,
point on this
anyone doesn't know,
podcast.
there's something a radio station in Portland did over a 2 Live Crew song. They did, "Hey, we want Greg Oden."
Yeah,
Um,
if you don't know what the original song is, you can go to Spotify, pull up Two Live Crew. It's probably their first or second most played song.
yep, it's
Very vulgar song.
yes. Don't play it if
Pretty
children
good,
are around.
yeah, pretty good beat though.
Yeah, and the parody's great, by the way. If just look at the parody of "Hey, we want Greg Oden." Um, but and again, this is one that I I won't say it's because of anything except for everybody was so high on Greg Oden. I was a guy who was beating the drum for Durant,
Yeah,
and this was purely the people that look at physical measurements versus the people who watch basketball. Partially, like Greg Oden, if he had stayed healthy, may have been dominant inside. I mean, the dude was huge,
yeah,
and but again. a guy that in college, like, I don't know if he carried steam because he played with Mike Conley. Like, he had a much better NBA player. Like Kevin Durant, like I remember watching him just being like, I can't remember in my lifetime seeing a guy that tall, like playing like he did at the college level. Like, I'd seen Dirk and some other guys at the pro level do it, but I'm like, oh, it's a European thing. Like to see a guy who is 6'11", who can dribble through five guys, stop on a dime, and pull up from 3 or from 15 or whatever. And then you took Greg Oden, who, I mean, for all intents and purposes, didn't ever really play in the NBA.
Yeah, I just got hurt immediately, and the thing that I've thought about for a while is, so obviously Odin goes 1, Durant goes 2. Durant was drafted by the Seattle Sonics, who a year later moved. And in theory, if you were a Sonics fan who was like, okay, I'm just going to start rooting for the next most local team, that means you have to start rooting for Greg Oden. So you just got basically kicked around twice, and that is not very fun. I had Odin on my list as well. Didn't have him quite as high just because of the whole injury thing. And I think that if he had stayed healthy, he would have been like a serviceable player. He would not have been as good as Kevin Durant. There was no universe where that was going to happen.
No.
Honestly, there was probably wasn't much of a chance of him ever being better than like Al Horford or Joakim Noah or one of the other big men from that draft.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who played 105 regular season games and 9 playoff games. His seasons played were 08-09, 9-10, and then randomly in 13-14 with Miami.
The Heat cameo, yeah.
So it's like, I mean, and it looks like he maybe played a year in China.
Yeah.
Where he averaged 13 points a game and 12.6 rebounds. Like, how did he not play longer over there? But
maybe his body just gave out. I honestly didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was in I think I remember watching one year. He was in like the basketball tournament, like I think it's the big like 3-on-3 one with like the $1 million prize. Yeah. So it's like, and I hope Greg, wherever you're doing well, I'm sure you're listening. I hope you're doing well. But mainly, yeah, I agree that maybe in terms of bust, like he's maybe lower down. But given the fact that we've kind of talked about a lot of things, I'm like, well, I'm just going to mix it up here and throw in the one with injury, just for diversity's sake. So
sure, yeah. So your first 3 picks were all number 1 overall picks, and we have not, and they've all been NFL or NBA. Mm-hmm. I am going to go to the number 1 pick. I am going to go away from the NFL and NBA, which are kind of the obvious sports to go with. But number 1 pick all the way back to 1966.
Oh,
in which the New York Mets selected Steve Chilcott. And if you don't know who Steve Chilcott is, that is probably because he never made it to the major leagues as the number 1 overall pick. He barely played in AAA. He just was just immediately a non-factor. There's a few of those guys who kind of appear on my list at various different points of guys who were number 1 overall picks in Major League Baseball and never made it to the pros. So it's kind of hard to differentiate among them. But in this particular case, so he was the number 1 overall pick by the New York Mets. The other guy that they were scouting, that they were considering drafting, was a college outfielder, I believe he was. He was an outfielder in the pros, but I believe he was a college outfielder as well. The Mets were concerned because he was a person of color and he was dating a white woman. And because this was a thing that bothered the New York Mets, they drafted Steve Chilcott over a young man out of Arizona State named Reggie Jackson.
That's
a truly deserved fate. Like, I feel bad that Steve Chilcott, who I don't really know a whole lot about him, but I've never heard of him doing anything problematic. But like that he has to kind of be the vessel to make fun of the Mets for this. But that is just an all-time whiff. And to bypass a guy for like objectively like stupid reasons who was like, again, he was Reggie Jackson, and like not only was he a great player, a Hall of Fame player, but he's the kind of player that you could watch once and immediately know, oh, this guy's like special. But instead they got like minor league depth, and that is why I went with Steve Chilcott.
Yeah, I mean, I won't lie. I didn't really know who he was until doing a little bit of research for this draft. Not someone I knew or knew about, so I don't have a ton to add. But yeah, boy, just because you don't like the optics of who the pick is dating, and you missed out on Mr. October, that's that stings a little bit.
It's like, not that it really mattered, but 3 years later, I mean, the Mets won the World Series. Obviously, Chilcott didn't contribute to that, but like Reggie Jackson was already like, I think he was an MVP that year in the American League. Like, imagine Reggie Jackson in that lineup. Like, let's just say I
Yeah,
think that they win more than that one World Series during that
yeah,
run.
I think you're probably right there.
All right, you're up.
All right, so I like the way you're going. I'm gonna stick it. I'm gonna go with MLB, and it's more just kind of the story behind this guy. I think it's funny a little bit. Going to the 1991 MLB
Yeah,
draft and the number one overall pick. Going to take Brian Taylor.
it was between him and Chilcott for me for
Yeah,
the
and
baseball result.
for anyone who doesn't know, like Brian Taylor, like obviously I won't lie, I was 1 year old when this draft was occurring, so I don't remember it. But like reading things and like seeing as people would come up, like this is apparently like the best high school pitcher anybody had ever seen, like close to throwing 100 miles an hour as a high schooler in 1991. Kind of a thing. Yeah, I looked up his high school stats. Look at his high school like senior year stats. Sometime he like struck out like 200 like 10 out of like 280 batters and only walked like 28 or something. It's crazy. And you know, he's not going to go to the major leagues right away. Gets taken number one overall by the Yankees, and you know goes through single A his first year, double A, and I think in '94 the next year there was a lot of expectation he'd crack the Yankee starting lineup. However, in the offseason, he gets into a fight protecting his brother and completely blows his shoulder out in this
Yeah,
fist fight.
I believe it was a bar fight too. It was not
Yeah.
like he was like in the most noble of circumstances.
Yeah. And, after that, I think he eventually came back, but by that point, they said he had like lost, I think, like eight to 10 miles an hour off his fastball. Um, you know, this wasn't necessarily like in terms of guys taking super high a draft, but I don't know. The Cleveland Indians at the time, now Guardians, selected a young man named Manny Ramirez. I think I've heard of him.
Yeah.
Um,
Part of the reason that I had Taylor lower is so Ramirez was the number 13 pick, and none of the other guys in the top 12 were like, I think Dimitri Young probably was the best player of that group. It was not
yeah,
an
Sean
amazing
Estes was
draft.
an okay player.
Yeah, he was fine. He would have been certainly better than Brian Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, Doug Glanville went number 12,
Oh, yeah.
as well. But like, yeah, in that draft, you also like Cliff Floyd was taken at 14, Sean Green taken at 16. Like,
I say the teens seemed to really be where the draft hit its
yeah,
stride.
and then I think about the only other maybe real good player maybe from the first round is a guy that for whatever reason I used to love watch pitchers. Aaron Seeley was taken 23rd overall in that draft.
Yeah.
So,
So, and like Aaron Seeley's the kind of player that like he would not be the most inspiring number one pick ever, but like if you get that as your number one pick, you're kind of like, that's fine. Like he was a good pitcher for quite a while, and
yeah, and
that's sort of
it's
good enough.
and like I said, yeah, the Cardinals had the fourth pick and they took Dimitri Young, which wasn't a terrible pick, really. So, but yeah, I mean, Taylor creeps up my list a little bit more just because the story of I ruined my entire career in a bar fight, basically, is
Yeah, it's pretty tough to resist. So,
yeah,
a stat that I came upon that I didn't realize until I was researching for this, there have been three pitchers who have been drafted number one overall who were high school pitchers who were being drafted out of high school. All three of them are on my list. Uh, and two of them never made the majors, and the other one did but was bad. So those names may come up later. They may not. We'll see. But not.
yeah,
There's a reason that most of the top pitchers end up going to college if they don't come from like another country because it's a tough profession. I
yeah,
understand why guys want to get their money, but I also understand why teams want to maybe be a little bit more conservative and maybe draft position players if they're going to go that early.
yeah. I mean, I agree with that. It's pitchers. It's the amount of development that happens, even for most guys between college and the MLB. Maybe they've gotten better at it now. You see more, but the Strasburgs of the world, the Michael Wakas of the world, if you will, that are coming straight out of college. But those are guys that stay 3-4 years in college, and then with basically the understanding of, if I just sit here and actually work on my stuff by the time I'm out of here, maybe I could use college as the minor leagues kind of a thing.
Those guys came up literally the year after they were drafted. So
yeah, and that's definitely the exception to the rule, even for guys who do stay the whole time, especially pitchers. Because I think baseball's a sport where if you draft a high school kid, unless he's Bryce Harper, like just physically, most high school kids aren't ready to play in the major leagues, or maybe almost all. I mean,
well, because even like somebody like Mike Trout, who's like the best player of his era, he came up to the majors 2 years after being drafted out of high school and wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And I mean, the next year he comes up and he's awesome. He's the best player in baseball, like right away. But there is kind of a development curve, even for guys who are like superstars. But
yeah,
Brian Taylor, good call. I am going to venture back into the world of basketball with my fourth pick, and I am going to venture for the first time to a draft that we have covered on this show.
Oh, there we go.
2013 NBA draft, number 1 overall pick. A guy who did not get drafted, even though we went like 50 rounds or whatever, whenever we had 2 guests on a draft. We still didn't pick this guy, Anthony Bennett.
Anthony Bennett.
So I will give them this, that there was not a consensus number 1 pick. And if you look at the guy, and we talked about this on that episode, but if you look at the guys who were drafted immediately after, who could have reasonably been number 1 picks, looking at like Victor Oladipo or, something like that, who would have been kind of an uninspiring number 1 pick, if not an outright bust. But, because Giannis Antetokounmpo, Rudy Gobert, CJ McCollum, none of these guys were considered like premium guys.
No.
But Anthony Bennett, like even by the standards of that draft, just absolutely an awful pick. Confusing in the moment. He had so he played in the NBA for a few years. Do you know how many career starts Anthony Bennett had?
I'm trying to think back to our episode. Like 9?
4. He had 4 career starts in the NBA. He was traded along with another number 1 overall pick who had just gotten drafted the year after he got picked for Kevin Love, and basically everyone agrees that was like a complete win trade for the Cavs, because I mean Andrew Wiggins was and is a much better NBA player than Anthony Bennett, but really who isn't. I saw that. So I wasn't really that familiar with Anthony Bennett when he got drafted. Like I'd heard his name, but I didn't know a lot about him. He got a lot of comps to Larry Johnson, which is a good way of saying he was a power forward for UNLV. So therefore, he was going to get comped to a different power forward from UNLV. It's like kind of the like every white guy gets compared to Larry Bird kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like finding a niche, but yeah, this guy was very bad, and like we mentioned. Olowokandi eventually kind of found a role in the NBA on the bench.
Yeah.
And it didn't even do that. He was just like completely useless right away.
Yeah. Out of the league really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he is definitely like, a guy that, it's like, well, and I remember that year too, like we talked about, it's like, it was, man, you didn't really know who was going to go number 1 overall. And then they went off the board and took this guy, and you're like, who knows? Maybe it's going to be great. Oh, it wasn't. Okay.
Yeah. Because even I remember thinking Nerlens Noel had a chance, and he ended up falling a little bit. Even Nerlens Noel, like he would have been.
He's a serviceable NBA guy. Like
he would have been like in the Wiggins tier. Like he would have not been a great number 1 pick, but boy, would he have been better than Anthony Bennett. And the one saving grace for Bennett is the fact that it's not like they missed out on like a super duper star, but
still. Agreed. Yeah, no, I mean, I think he's probably the one, maybe even all these one other busts and stuff that, like, if you just look straight track record of what he did in the league for a guy who made it, and something, in a sport like basketball, not going to necessarily count. Like I said, hockey, baseball guys are a little different because a lot of them don't make it. But yeah, that was definitely not good.
All right, you are up.
All right, well, there's been a distinct lack of hockey on this one, so let's talk hockey.
There has been.
And, like I said, there's some guys, especially in the expansion draft, that in the 60s, they had a bunch of guys, but a lot of those top, 4 picks never made the NHL, so I don't necessarily put them in the same level. But you want to talk about fun number 1 overall picks that the team just screwed up in a lot of capacities on. I'm going to go to Rick DiPietro, 2000, the New York Islanders.
Yeah, this is, I think, he is, I think, by far the best player that's been drafted so far. But boy, did the team mess up the delivery.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, when you look at his just baseline stats, 318 NHL games he played in, a 2.87 goals against, 90.2 save percentage.
That's fine.
I won't lie, the 287 is pretty good. The 902, not great, but here's the thing. For anyone who doesn't know, what was it? 3 years earlier, with the number 4 overall pick, the New York Islanders drafted a fine Canadian goaltender.
Well, he must not have been very good. If he was, if they were trying another goalie.
His name is Roberto Luongo. I don't know, like one of the goalies who's played the most games in the NHL all time, has a gold medal with Team Canada.
I believe he's second all time in goalie point shares, which I don't think he's the second best goalie ever, but that seems pretty meaningful.
Yeah, he was. So they felt that DiPietro was better than Roberto Luongo, and he got traded to the Panthers. Which, okay, guy doesn't necessarily work out. It couldn't be that bad. But he's also the Bobby Bonilla of the NHL.
He sure is.
Because he got bought out in 2013, and he will be paid through the end of the 28-29 season. So he's gotten 11 years of payments, and he's still got 5 more to go.
Yeah, for those who are not familiar with the contract he signed, this was right after an NHL lockout that was largely spurred by teams not being able to get out of their own way with contracts. They signed this dude to a 15-year contract.
$67.5 million.
After a pretty good season, but nobody was oh, this guy's the best goalie in the NHL.
Yeah. And that was the thing is we saw, this is the era we were seeing the Kovalchuk contract. That was 13 years, I think, maybe.
Yeah, the one that got nullified by the league.
Yes. So then this one went through, and if you know anything, I'm a firm believer in hockey. You don't sign goalies anymore, in most cases, to 3 or 4 year deals, just because goalies can turn on a dime.
Yeah, and if you're going to do it, it needs to be elite guys. It needs to be capital E elite guys.
Yeah,
this was not Dominic Hasek they were extending. This
no, and even at this age, Dominic Hasek wasn't at that stage of his career wasn't what he ended up becoming.
That's true.
He was good, but but this isn't prime Patrick Waugh. This isn't prime Marty Brodeur. This isn't. Even in today, I don't even know today. Prime Carey Price maybe would have been, but he had the injury concerns, I guess. But anyway, I digress.
Hellebuck maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and today's NHL. Shoot, who knows today? Because the goalie position is just.
I would have said Vasilevsky before this year, but
yeah, it's. Hellebuck's probably the best goalie in the NHL now, but that's for another day. But it's the combination of, you did it, and this guy, he was really hyped coming in. He won a World Juniors for the U.S. I think he led Boston, BU to a national championship. So it's another one of these guys super hyped, but the NHL is a different level, and I feel like it's a lot harder to evaluate goaltenders than skaters. if I'm being honest. So I think this is
and
just
goalies usually don't go number one. There's not a huge number of those.
no. It's
Like Marc-Andre Fleury went number one. I'm trying to think
better
if
than Rick DiPietro.
yes,
Just despite him not being very good now, but
well, sure, but he's also 21 years after he got drafted.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean he's a little long on the tooth, I guess, but
we'll have to do that draft sometime too. 2003 is a loaded one.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's pretty good. So I'll let you have the next pick.
Good call. Number 5, I am going to make a pick that is not too dissimilar to my first pick, which was a St. Louis Rams draft bust. This is a player who was drafted higher and arguably was worse. There was just a lot fewer options for them, so I'll give him a little bit benefit of the doubt. 2009 NFL draft, St. Louis Rams selected Jason Smith. Jason Smith played at Baylor. He was okay at Baylor. Was never worthy of the number 2 pick. At Baylor, he played out of a 2-point stance as in a spread offense that passed the ball around a lot. There was kind of this assumption, this guy's probably not going to be very much of a run blocker. That is correct. He started.
He also wasn't a pass blocker.
Well, so he started for 1 year for the Rams as a rookie. They went 1-15. He got beaten out for a starting job by Roger Saffold, who was a second-round rookie the next year. He got traded to the Jets for a bag of footballs, I think it was, and that was pretty much it for him. So the Rams had 2 guys that they drafted number 2 overall who were offensive linemen. I don't know if Greg Robinson's on your list. He wasn't on mine because I think that he is... he was not worthy of the number 2 pick, but he was okay. He was not a bad starter.
He stuck around and played.
Jason Smith was terrible. And again, this was a pretty mediocre draft. I don't really have an alternative in mind of a player who was drafted soon thereafter who would have been an awesome pick. Even going down to Percy Harvin or something like that, who was drafted in the early 20s. Percy Harvin as a number 2 pick would have felt a little bit like the Tavon Austin pick.
Yeah,
which would have been pretty underwhelming as well. But that was that was rough. The old Jason Smith. There was no world where they were going to get Matthew Stafford, but had they drafted Matthew Stafford, who was the number 1 overall pick, and I don't even necessarily think Stafford's an elite number 1 overall pick kind of guy, but that would have spared them from drafting Sam Bradford, who, while he was much better than Jason Smith, was basically the most meh number 1 overall pick you could ever imagine. So,
yeah,
there are some rants about the St. Louis Rams draft strategy that I could go on that I'm going to cut myself off from. So you can feel free to comment on Jason Smith /pick whenever you would like.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely on my list, and when you were talking about he's not the only one on my list, that was the one glaringly in my eyes. I remember even making the pick, just being like, why? Other than the fact, it's another one of these things, and maybe this is just obviously, he was big.
Yes, he was big. I will give him that.
He was a big guy, but, it was just, it just defined that era of the St. Louis Rams and their drafting. I feel like it was just oh, this is what people say we need. Let's get the wrong guy at that position. It's
yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I think your rant covers a lot of my feelings. I don't want to.
Yeah, unlike Lawrence Phillips, where I take pride in knocking him down a peg, I don't really have that same sort of vitriol towards Jason Smith personally. It's not his fault. I'm not going to blame a guy for taking number 2 overall pick money if somebody's offering it, but that was not a good choice by the team.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so I will stick in the NFL, and we talked about in one of my earlier picks about a great pick at wide receiver that was made at number 2 by the Detroit Lions. Let's talk about one that wasn't.
He was my next football player up, so.
Let's go back 4 years before that draft, 2003. Bengals take Carson Palmer at number 1. And the Detroit Lions, they took Charles Rogers.
So I have to say, this was like maybe the peak of my NFL draft nerddom was around this time. I was in love with Charles Rogers. I was obviously wrong, but I was in love with Charles
I mean,
Rogers.
and John, if you could enlighten me, there's a wide receiver taken at number 3 by the Texans. Who was that young man?
That was a guy that played for maybe the greatest college football team ever, Andre Johnson.
That it was indeed a man who, despite being a great wide receiver, I will always remember for his fist fight on the field with good old Cortland Finnegan. Is that his name?
I believe so. Yes.
Sorry, St. Louis Rams legend Cortland Finnegan.
That's yeah. He wasn't a Ram at the time, but yeah.
No, yeah, that's when he's with the Titans. But swing and a miss. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the top guys taken in this draft weren't great. I mean, Palmer was a good quarterback. Obviously, the immediate miss out, it's like, okay, there's 2 top receivers. Which one do we take? And boy, did you miss and take the wrong one.
Yeah. And he actually was okay his first couple games, but he got hurt pretty quickly, and it was
he only played in 15 NFL games. That's part of it. I mean, career statistics of 36 catches for 440 yards, 4 touchdowns. So it's like, not out of a number 2. Like I said, other guys that were taken in this, like, I don't know, say the top 10, like Byron Leftwich, Kevin Williams. He probably would have been nice to have on defense for him. And
yeah, he probably would have been kind of like a little bit of like the Ndamukong Suh pick, just a little bit.
Terrell Suggs, he was pretty good.
Not bad. Yeah.
The guy that I wanted the Rams to get so bad in this draft that was drafted right before them, Marcus Trufant. That's why I wanted the Rams to draft so badly that year. And then they ended up with Jimmy Kennedy.
It was Jimmy Kennedy draft, yeah.
When the Rams just thought, hey, let's just take defensive tackles like all the time.
This is kind of what the Lions did with wide receivers, and Rodgers was kind of the beginning of that trend. But
it's true. I mean,
he was definitely the one that panned out the least.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Johnson draft came in 2007, everybody's like, oh, they're going to do it again. But like everybody's like, Detroit, you have to do this, though. Like, it wasn't a debate. It's like, if Calvin Johnson's there, you take Calvin Johnson. And so they eventually got it right,
They only needed like 4 attempts to get there.
Hey, as we've seen, some teams can be given that many chances and still don't get there. So
yeah. Charles Rogers also somebody gone too soon. He had I think it was liver cancer, which part of that I think was probably self-inflicted because he had a lot of substance issues that he developed as well. But
obviously, at the age of 38, that's far too young to be gone.
Yeah. Gonna actually give a little moment of silence to him since I didn't for Lawrence Phillips. But all right, so I am up next, and I am going to go with somebody that honestly I should have possibly taken this guy with the number 1 pick because no one remembers number 2. I'm going to the 1993 NHL draft, and I'm going with Alexander Daig.
Go with Daig, Ottawa.
So the thing about Alexander Daig is he actually, like, if you look at his career numbers, they're not horrible. He's not the worst player to ever be drafted number 1 overall. 616 career games, 129 career goals, 327 points. That's like, again, you don't want him at number 1, but like not a horrible player. But the circumstances around it was the draft. So Ottawa had the number 1 pick. They were, I'm not sure I don't think they were a fresh expansion team, but they were like a very new team. And the draft was being held in Ottawa. And I think there was a lot of pressure on them to draft this like bilingual French Canadian kid because like Ottawa, the whole reason they're the capital of Canada is because it's like right on the border of Ontario and Quebec, and he kind of seemed like a good cultural fit, but came in with this bravado of being, and he said at the draft that he was glad he was number 1 because no one remembers number 2. Jason, do you remember who the number 2 pick in that draft was?
The 1993 NHL draft. Nobody remembers number 2. Well, As a St. Louis Blues fan, I do remember this guy. I
I
believe
think you
it's
probably would remember him even if you weren't a St. Louis Blue.
probably, but I believe his name was Chris Pronger. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Hockey Hall of Famer, former MVP, former Norris winner, I think multiple-time gold medalist probably for Canada.
Probably.
Yeah, a guy who was kind of like was the ultimate like plug and play defenseman for a while. Like once he was done with his Blues run, he was just kind of like, oh, Edmonton's gonna get him. Oh, Anaheim's gonna get him. Oh, Philly's gonna get
Philadelphia.
him, and just kind of like he's gonna just like drag kind of mediocre teams to the Stanley Cup Finals because he has that power. Like legitimately one of the best defensemen in NHL history. I'd say like you could put him in the top 10 and I wouldn't really have a strong argument against it. Um, would have been a pretty good player to have at number one overall. I know
Mhm.
I don't remember. He's definitely not from Quebec. I don't remember. I think he actually might be from Ontario. But regardless, though, I think people would have gotten past the language barrier thing. I find that most people in most cultures who speak most languages like having good players on their team.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is too, they turned down like I don't know if you found this in your research, but I guess the Nordiques,
Oh
obviously being in
yeah,
Quebec, they
yeah.
offered like guys like Forsberg, Peter Forsberg, Owen Nolan, like to get the pick to take this kid, and they were
Basically, like
like, nah,
repackage the Lindros package.
yeah, and it's like, oh, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
not to mention another Hockey Hall of Famer went number 4 in this draft too.
I think I missed that. Who was number 4?
That would be another eventual St. Louis Blues legend drafted by the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Mr. Paul Correa went number 4
Oh,
in this draft.
who was like an all-time outstanding freshman in college, if I remember correctly.
At
So,
Maine, if
yeah,
memory serves.
yeah, but again, not from Quebec, so
Yeah,
which is weird because Ottawa's not in Quebec either. But I like
yeah,
the idea. I like the idea that the Nordiques were just like all in on trying to get like French Canadian guys for the market that's like 98% French speaking. It kind of reminds me of like the run in the later years of the Atlanta Thrashers, where their whole marketing seemed to be just acquire as many black players as possible. Which
I mean,
like in some cases, like Dustin Bufflin, yeah, good player. That's fair
yeah,
enough. But like you don't need to just like load up on like that's like ultimately the thing that's going to bring fans in is going to be good players. Like
right. I mean, yeah, if you're gonna do it, just do like what the Red Wings did. It's like get really good Russians, like
sure.
that can play together. I mean,
And when you're going to do the pandering thing, get like Dylan Larkin or Justin Applicator, who I mean kind of became a punchline eventually, but good player for a while. Both
good
guys from
player.
Michigan. But
Yeah, and I mean, people love them some D-Boss, man.
all right, you're
All
up.
right. All right. So I'd be remiss. This doesn't have to be a long discussion, but I do think it needs to get in here. And while he eventually kind of found a role, I think later, a little bit in his career, had some injuries. 1984 NBA draft, number 2.
Yeah.
Sam Bowie. I mean, he had injuries, and of course, Michael Jordan was drafted the pick after him. I mean, this is one that you probably heard picked to death, and honestly probably deserved to be higher in this draft just because of the fact of you could have had. I'm still
Michael
going to
Jordan.
say it,
Yeah.
the second best player in NBA history. That's right. Come at me with your comments. But
Look, I think Bob Pettit's great too, but I just don't know that I can put him ahead of Jordan.
I was going with Harry the Horse Gallatin actually.
TRU.
He was Nemost, I think, but I don't know what it might still be the teachers' college when he was
I think
there.
it
I
was
don't
still a
know.
teacher's college, yeah. He went to Truman State University, as it's
Yeah.
currently known.
Yes. No, but boy, and it's funny because like if you look at the technical of the draft, like Jordan went third. It's like Olajuwon is in no way a bust, but
Yeah.
Olajuwon wasn't Jordan either. But Olajuwon at number 1, nowhere close to a bust, obviously.
And the thing is, like, there were not people who were arguing that Houston should take Michael Jordan over Hakeem Olajuwon or Akeem Olajuwon, as he was known at the time. There were
Yeah.
absolutely people arguing that Portland should take Jordan over
Jordan over
Sam.
Bowie. Yeah.
And I will say Sam Bowie had a better NBA career than people remember. I will give him that.
Yeah, if I remember, like he got hurt a little bit kind of early on, but then became a decent role player, kind of off the bench and stuff in
Yeah,
his later years.
he was a starter for a while with New Jersey. Like he was not a
Yeah,
bad player, but
that's right. It's like Nets and Lakers, maybe. I think he had some decent runs with,
maybe, yeah.
but he's not Jordan.
Also, the fact that their logic for not taking Jordan was that they already had Clyde Drexler, which okay, but you can play both of them. Like there's no way in the modern NBA they would be so like they would
Yeah,
absolutely just both be on the same court at the same like Jordan was big enough that you could play him as like kind of an undersized three and have him and
yeah.
Drexler. I mean, move
I mean,
Drexler to the
Jordan
point. Who
maybe could
cares?
have played the point. I mean,
Yeah,
Jordan could
like
have played the one. It's
put Jordan at center if he really had to.
I mean,
Get him on
gosh,
the court.
can you imagine those teams if you had Drexler and Jordan playing together?
Thinking about like the '92 team that went to the finals and lost to the Jordan Bulls. That would have
The
been
Jordan Bulls.
like once they
Yeah.
got once they got like Arvydas Sabonis in there, hit him
Hey,
as the center with Drexler and Jordan would have been pretty. And was Terry Cummings the point guard at that point? I'm trying to remember.
that sounds right. I wouldn't quote me.
This is why we need P Funk on just to be the NBA ombudsman. But
Yeah, that's what we need him for. But yeah, I mean, I think it at least needs to be mentioned because it's another different thing. I think partially to give justice for Sam Bowie. However, you should have been taken ahead of Michael Jordan.
correct. Yeah. So for my next pick, number 7 overall, I'm going to go with somebody that, even though I'm drafting this person number 7, obviously, I suspect this person's probably not on your list.
Okay.
This was not a person I was really familiar with prior to arranging this. It is the most recent person on my draft board, drafted in 2021, but already qualifies as just like a
Oh,
mammoth all-time bust.
is this the NFL?
It is not the NFL.
Oh,
I am going with the WNBA's number 1 overall pick,
oh
Charlie
my gosh.
Collier. Charlie Collier
Who?
was Charlie Collier was the number 1 overall pick by the Dallas Wings in 2021. Let me pull up. So the thing is, there are not very many busts in the WNBA. Like I ran through it, and like this one just absolutely stands alone. So I'm pulling up Charlie Collier's like stats page on Basketball Reference. It's taken me a while to get there because that's how uneventful of a career this player's. And this was like the year after like Sabrina Ionescu, who like even if you're not like a WNBA fan, and like admittedly I'm like I'll watch the finals or whatever, but it's not a sport that I follow super closely. So but like she's very famous. Charlie Collier, rookie season, played in 28 games for Dallas, started 18. She averaged 3.4 points per game. She was a center, and she got 0.2 blocks a game. Not what you want. The next
No,
season, 17 games, 0 starts, 4.6 minutes per game. She blocked 0 shots the entire season, zero point
that's
0.6
good.
rebounds, and 2 points per game. Again, this was the number 1 overall pick 2 seasons prior for a team that wasn't very good. It's not like they had a lot of options. She was released. She was not picked up for the 2023 season. She is not signed for the 2024 season. She was a number 1 overall pick. She played 2 seasons, and they were just like, we're done. Like, even Anthony Bennett got like 4 years. But, like, Charlie Collier is, like, far and away the worst WNBA draft pick ever. And I feel weird saying, like, writing her off because she is, like, currently, I think, 24 years old. But it just seems like kind of everybody agreed. And she went to Texas, was where she played in college. But
Okay. So I hadn't heard of her, and usually I know like the top
yeah, I don't think
ish
she would.
player in women's college basketball that comes out.
Yeah, I don't think this is like a Caitlin Clark situation where people are saying she's like a once in a generation kind of number 1 overall pick. But still, like if you're
Yeah.
that pick,
Yeah,
there's an
not Candace
expectation.
Parker coming out or nothing.
Yeah. Well, like some of the other picks who are number 1 picks who don't end up being like true stars, but they can be like good. Like I looked at a list of, and I can't remember names, but looking at lists of like the top WNBA busts. It was lists that were like a couple years old, and there were players who like started off slow but ended up like playing as starters on championship teams and like averaging 15 points a game or something like that. And Charlie Collier is not that. And I personally feel that the best way to respect women's sports is to evaluate women's sports critically. And if there's sort of this like almost toxic positivity that I think has kind of gone away from the WNBA a lot, that I think has actually been huge for the league's development, which is you can say some of these players suck. Like that's fine. Like
Yeah.
and she was bad. Like she is the Anthony Bennett of the WNBA.
Yeah. No, that's kind of mad because my next pick I was going to go away from the major four sports, and then you beat me to it. So I'm a little bummed about that. Now I'm going to look like a copycat, but it's all right.
If you have like an MLS Super Draft person locked and loaded, you go for it.
I do, actually.
Nice.
2005 MLS Draft. Number 1 overall pick. A young man by the name of Nicholas Besagno. You know how many games? Besagno.
Yeah, I'm spelling it phonetically. I don't know that name at all. You're going to have to introduce me to Nicholas.
Do you know how many games that Nicholas played in his MLS career?
So, generally speaking, the MLS Super Draft is not considered like the most vital of drafts for like player development.
No, and to be fair, like
I'm going to say it's 0, basically.
No, he played in 8 games over 3 years.
That's actually worse than 0.
And to be fair, like I looked at the draft, I didn't recognize a ton of names. The big name that was in this draft, I thought Brad Guzan was available in this draft.
The starting goalkeeper for the first U.S. men's national team game I ever attended, Brad Guzan.
Yeah, I believe he's still with Atlanta United too.
Man,
he's not good, but he had his moment. He played in Europe, obviously, and stuff. So, but old Nicholas here. These are his stats. He has 440 minutes played of the 8 games he played, and he started half of them. Started 4. No goals, no assists, 1 shot, 0 shots on target.
What position was he?
He was a midfielder.
Okay. Not what you want.
Yeah, committed 9 fouls, 2 yellow cards.
Oh my goodness.
Like that was his career stats. Like 9 fouls, to be fair. Like in this era of MLS, I think they were calling a lot more fouls.
I just went to the St. Louis City game last weekend. I'm familiar with the volume of fouls that are called.
Yeah. St. Louis City, the team that is still mid-table despite not losing a game because they have like 1 win and 4 ties. Go City.
True soccer.
Yeah, I mean, but hey, shout out to the U.S. men's national team for beating Mexico again and winning the Nations League and remaining the only team to win the CONCACAF Nations League. So
that's right.
Yeah, this is one I thought was just funny. There's a few guys when you look at MLS, but to me, I was just like, oof, to go number 1 overall, and like, it's one thing if you just don't make it, but when it's in 3 years, the team that drafted you, like the most games he played 2 games, 4 games, 2 games in his 3 years that he played, and then the team's like, we're done.
What team was he again?
Real Salt Lake. So he was.
I blame the fact that they go by Real Salt Lake, which is a completely idiotic team name. But
I mean,
you're not Spanish. It's fine. Just call yourself Salt Lake. It's whatever.
Yeah. Salt Lake City SC or FC sounds.
That's fine.
Better.
Yeah. I don't care. That's fine.
I would just call myself the GSLs, man. Just be like, we're the Great Salt Lakes. That would be a sweet name.
That'd be pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Right. So I am going to go with. So a couple rounds ago, you picked a number 2 overall pick out of Michigan State in the NFL. I am also going to go with a number 2 overall pick out of Michigan State in the NFL. 1989, I am going with Tony Mandarich. Tony Mandarich is kind of a legendary bust. Probably had a better career than most people remember, but like early on, it was just a lot of steroid controversies and came in with just way too much hype. Ended up so he was drafted by the Packers. He eventually had like an okay like career as like a guard for the Colts before injuries kind of caught up to him. If he had just been that from the beginning, he's kind of been like the Gray Robinson tier of like he's disappointing. You can even call him a bust, but he's not like an all-time bust. But the real thing that seals the deal for Tony Mandarich, the next 3 picks after he went number 2 overall, the Detroit Lions selected Barry Sanders. The
Heard of him.
Kansas City Chiefs selected Derek Thomas.
Heard of him.
And the Atlanta Falcons selected Deion Sanders. That is 3 like all-time Hall of Famers. And
yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, the Packers could have used any of them, quite frankly. And like the Packers at that point were pretty bad, but like they were not too far away, and obviously they didn't know this yet, from being like a really good team. Can you imagine like the like early Brett Favre years if they could also hand the ball off to Barry Sanders, or if they had like Derek Thomas just crushing people in the middle of the field at linebacker? That's just absurd to think of.
Yeah, that would change the complexion of things for sure. Yeah, boy, that's up there with like Jamarcus in terms of like brutality right after you. I feel like.
Yeah.
But it's just like boom, boom, boom. It's oof.
All right, so we have 8 rounds down. How many rounds do we want to go? Do we want to go to 10 each?
Yeah, you would do 2 more.
Okay, sure. You are up at number 9.
All right. Next one has a near and dear place in my heart. Because much like you love the Charles Rodgers pick, I was so high on this guy. A little lower than some of these other draft picks I've made. But I'm going to 2012, the number 5 overall draft pick. Wide receiver out of Oklahoma State University, Justin Blackmon.
Actually, not the 2012 NFL draft pick I had on my board, but yeah, fair enough.
I mean,
it was rough. Career.
Yeah. If you look up, like I said, the reason I went with him, it was because I was so high on this guy being the next like Calvin Johnson. Like I thought he was the best thing ever. Which, to be fair, his rookie year was good. He had a pretty decent rookie year for a not great Jacksonville team. But then he got suspended. And he got suspended again.
He sure
did. And then he just, after having a good first year, played 4 games in his second season. We haven't heard from him since.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it's a, maybe akin to the, to my understanding, he didn't necessarily have. I think he had at least 1 DUI in college.
I think so, but I feel like it wasn't a thing that was talked about as like a major like character issue guy. Or
yeah,
anything.
I feel like it came out when the NFL like suspended him for. I mean, I think his first suspension was substance abuse. Violating the policy or whatever, and then. Then I think he got hurt after that, had an injury, and then. He got busted. I think it was possession of something. It might have just been marijuana. Sure, but at that point, essentially, I think Jacksonville just gave up on him and was like,
yeah. At that point, you're not so mad about like the act that busted for, but the fact that he got busted, the fact that he like isn't being like completely under the radar in every possible way.
Yeah, and it's I think if I remember, he started rehab. I don't know if it was ever said that he finished it or not. And then basically from that point, the NFL just said, no, you can't come back, more or less. I think he tried to go to the CFL, but eventually I don't think he played there either. And then I think he's just kind of had some more troubles, unfortunately, after his playing career. But according to Wikipedia, he reportedly completed the terms of his latest probation in 2017. Doesn't seem to have anything since then, so I really hope that he's living happy now. But
that's good.
I mean, a guy who had all the tools, but is an unfortunate case of he was a young kid who made some mistakes, and he had to pay the consequences of those mistakes.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to have sympathy for guys like, who have like substance abuse issues or, some kind of things like that, rather than like people who have like violent outbursts and stuff. Even though a lot of that is also like, upbringing and stuff, but it's also a natural tendency to criticize is a lot more understandable in those cases. So are you going to, I don't want to give away too much, but do you have anyone else from the 2012 NFL draft on your board? Because I'm not pick here, but I think it's a worthy note to make.
Yeah, I'm not going to take him if it's who I think you're thinking of.
The guy that I had on my board for the 2012 NFL draft was the number 3 pick, Trent Richardson, who was pretty lousy and was a running back and was like very clearly a system running back at Alabama. And like number 3 overall for anybody at a running back at that point in time seemed crazy. Arguably not the craziest pick the Browns made in that first round, though, because they drafted a 28-year-old quarterback and Justin Blackman's quarterback in college, Brandon Weeden. And Skip Bayless loved this draft for them. Skip Bayless was all about how Brandon Weeden and Trent Richardson were going to guide the Browns to glory.
He was the next Chris Winkie, man.
He sure was the next Chris Winkie. And like he ended up being like kind of weird because like had Brandon Weeden just been drafted in like the 4th or 5th round like he should have been, we would just not be talking about him as some sort of bust.
No, and he was fine. Like especially when it's in Dallas and stuff. Like he had some decent stuff when he had to fill in here and there. I mean, I think you could make the argument RG3 at 2. I mean,
yeah, and like he
had again more injury, and had a good. I mean, he lost to the Rams his rookie year, so
he did.
I remember that game, but now we get the joy of having RG3 on our college football televisions, and
very good broadcaster. Yeah,
he's very good, and he's just a delight. Like they need more broadcasters that actually show personality like he does. So, shout out to RG3. We love you. Thank you for not still playing in the NFL so we can get you on our TVs on Saturdays.
All right, so for my pick, I am going to go with what would probably be considered the equivalent pick to your DiPietro pick. It's not hockey, but this is a player who is a little bit too good to be considered an all-time bust on its own merits, but the story justifies it. So 1996 Major League Baseball draft, number 2 overall pick by the Minnesota Twins was Travis Lee. You might remember Travis Lee.
Yeah.
Travis Lee was like an okay first baseman for a little bit. Not a guy you would pick at number 2 overall, but like certainly not along the lines of like Steve Chilcott or Brian Taylor. Like he made the majors, he played, he was competent for a minute. If you don't remember Travis Lee playing with the Minnesota Twins, you are correct. This is not, however, a case of a player not signing with the team. So a few of those guys made my list as well. I mean, it is, but it's a little bit different. So Travis Lee, within 15 days of the draft, was not tendered an offer by the Minnesota Twins, which means that they lost the rights to Travis Lee and he became a free agent. Just like, the only thing I can even think of that's comparable to that is whenever like the Minnesota Vikings ran out of time on their draft pick. And like we referenced that draft earlier, they got Kevin Williams out of it, so it ended up fine for them. But like the Twins just lost the number 2 overall player because they didn't offer him a contract, and this wasn't a dispute over money. They literally didn't offer him it. We don't know what it would have taken to sign him. He ended up becoming a free agent, signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were still a year away from playing in Major League Baseball, but he was in their opening day lineup of their very first game as a rookie, which, very cool for him. He made way more money signing a true free agent contract than he would have coming out of the draft. As somebody who enjoys drafts but finds them a little bit immoral, I salute Travis Lee for being able to subvert the system. And that is my pick.
Yeah, that's it. That's a great story because and I love the justification. It's not your typical like, oh, he didn't pan out. It's like, no, the team were idiots, so it became a draft bust for them. Not the player. I mean, and it's funny because I know when we were texting about this idea, I made a joke to you about like, oh, Eli Manning, huge draft bust because he never threw a pass for the Chargers. I mean, you could go down that hole. I mean, with draft day picks of the NBA, and
the thing is, the Chargers ended up getting, I would say, the better quarterback though in that trade because they got Phillip Rivers.
Yeah,
he didn't win the Super Bowl, but like maybe he would have if he were Giants. But
yeah, I agree. But all right, so should we try to get into the last picks here?
Yeah, you gotta make it count.
Gotta make it count. Against form, I'm going to go to basketball again, I think.
Okay.
And one that another number one overall pick, 2001. I'm going to go with Kwame Brown. He just.
It is my obligation as a St. Louis Cardinals blogger to point out that Kwame Brown was high school classmates with Adam Wainwright. You may continue. I just had to point that out.
Yeah. And his career was almost as good as Adam Wainwright's MLB career.
I would say it was almost as good as Adam Wainwright's NBA career.
No,
that's not fair, but
I thought about making a mean joke and saying it was as good as Adam Wainwright's singing career, but
that career's still going though. We don't know how that's going to end.
That's true, and he's already gotten invited to the Opry. I think maybe he played there by now. I think so. Good for Adam.
Album comes out April 5th.
I will most likely not listen to it.
He's making his country album debut 1 week after Beyonce. Who's riding whose coattails? It's hard to say.
I mean, this ain't Texas. Ain't no hold'em. Anyway.
I get that reference.
Yeah, for anyone, Beehive, what up? But no, I mean, if you don't know Kwame Brown, he was a guy. First of all, I'm sure John, you do know, but do you know who was taken second and third overall in this draft behind Kwame
Brown? Second overall was Tyson Chandler. Was third Pau Gasol?
Pau Gasol was third.
Yeah. Pau Gasol unquestionably better than both, but yes.
Yes, agreed. But I mean, Tyson Chandler is a guy who has an Olympic gold medal, so I think Pau does not. You ever heard the great stories about like Kobe would just like walk in and like intentionally piss Pau off like in their first game after the off seasons when they would beat them for the gold medal? He just walked in with his gold medal like, hey Pau. Like
that was
by the way, that's the weirdest like love friendship ever is Pau Gasol and Kobe Bryant.
I mean, they were teammates in the NBA and won a couple championships together. I get it, but
yeah, but
I mean that is to Kobe, who was like constantly just trying to rip off Michael Jordan. That was his version of like the Tony Kukoc thing, where it was just like, I aggressively hate this guy based on international play, and then eventually learn to respect him.
So, boy, did I love me some Tony Kukoc, by the way, when I was a kid growing up. But but yeah, Kwame Brown. I mean, guy that honestly, like, he couldn't even get in shape. Like, I don't know that he was ever in like 82 game playing shape. And I think he lasted 4 years.
The thing is, and I kind of feel this way about another guy who was drafted high in that draft, Eddie Curry. I think that just kind of was his body type.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's on the Wizards for not realizing that. And it's on Michael Jordan for basically drafting Kwame Brown because, like, he played him in one-on-one and was like, this guy really cares. It's like, okay. Could have probably drafted Pau Gasol, though.
Yeah, and it's, but apparently he did try to make it in the big three.
He did, yeah.
And I think they made the finals with him. So, hey, he's,
Yeah, and a little bit like a little bit like Olowokandi and a couple other guys that have come up. He eventually kind of did become he was like a decent defensive player throughout his career, but the problem is you start looking at these guys and you're like, you can justify them eventually, like as like late lottery picks, even maybe if you kind of squint, but there's no way as a number one pick, not even close.
No, and it's I mean, it ended up like you said, he found a thing, but playing in some of these years, I mean, again, 23, 15. Then he had a decent. He had he had a soul coming in like 9 and 22 games his last two. So I mean, but had 607 games played, but just nowhere near a number one, overall pick after it was 4 years in Washington, and then started out like LA. I guess he had his role a little bit there, but he was also on some really good LA teams.
That's kind of what he was destined for, and they just didn't seem to realize it.
Yeah, and when you have a guy like Pau Gasol who goes there, like even Tyson Chandler, like you said, Kwame became a decent defensive player. Like Tyson Chandler was an elite defensive interior player.
Like had Kwame hit all the marks on his career, he would have been Tyson Chandler.
Yeah, and even you could probably make the argument Tyson Chandler stretch it too, like kind of a thing.
As a Chicago Bulls fan who did not experience the best years of Tyson Chandler, I would agree.
Yeah.
I have nothing against him personally. I actually really respected what he became, but it did not work out well for them. All right, so number 10 overall, or number 10 pick for me, number 20 overall pick. A few guys I'm looking at that giving some consideration to. I think kind of the elephant in the room pick is Len Bias, just because he died 2 days after he was drafted number 2 overall, but I just don't really feel like it. And honestly, there were not a lot of guys after him that were like huge difference makers anyway. Mark Appel was the number 1 overall pick, never made the majors. Guy after him was Chris Bryant. There's a few other cases like that. Gave some serious considering to Russell Erxleben, who was a number 11 overall pick in 1979 NFL draft. Basically just because it was insane that the New Orleans Saints wanted to draft him because he was a kicker / punter, and they figured they could just sort of save a roster spot, and he was like a god-awful kicker. And
versatility, man.
Yeah. But, and honest, like a couple of the names on my list are like pretty good players. Like Jeff King was a number 1 overall pick in baseball. Had an okay career, but also literally retired the day after his pension vested because he hated playing baseball. Honestly, respect, man. Phil Nevin, who had a good MLB career, but annoyed Hal Newhouser so much that he resigned on the spot as a scout for the Astros because they wouldn't listen to him when he said to pick Derek Jeter instead. But like Phil Nevin's way too good for this level.
Yeah,
I got to go with a guy that honestly, this was a life lesson for me. 2003 NBA draft. I think you know where I'm going with this. Darko Milicic, number 1 or number 2 pick.
I was between him and Kwame for my last pick, so
I was in love with Darko Milicic, and I hadn't really seen him play, and this was kind of a lesson to me of, hey, just because they're trying to say that he's like the next Dirk Nowitzki, that was just because he was like a big white European guy. You would even get occasional like Larry Bird comps, and if you ever saw Darko play, like even if Darko had been a much better version of what he became, stylistically, not even in the same stratosphere as Larry Bird in terms of style. Like there's at least a little bit of Nowitzki because he was like a bigger guy and got rebound stuff, but ultimately was not that kind of guy. I think that this was a case of a guy who just really got overexposed. He was a guy who was, being talked about as if LeBron James isn't in this draft, he would be like a serious contender for the number 1 overall pick. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he's a guy that if he had gone like later in the first round, I think could have turned out okay. Kind of fit that mold of like had moments as like he was starting like relatively late in his career, granted for some kind of bad teams, but like he was a useful enough player towards the end. But when you consider that the next 3 picks after him were Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade, did not. It's hard to crush the Pistons too much. Like, so the Pistons won the NBA championship during Darko's rookie year, got him the nickname of the Human Victory Cigar. They did not win because of Darko by any means, but like,
and a couple other guys. Yeah.
I've heard people make the argument, and the reason they had that draft pick is because of a long ago trade for Otis Thorpe. It's not because of like they were bad the year before. And like I've heard the argument made that had they drafted Carmelo Anthony, it may have actually been kind of a problem for them because he wouldn't have fit their system as well as Tayshaun Prince. They would have tried to like force him into the starting lineup rather than having Carmelo come off the bench. Realistically, though, if they had drafted Dwayne Wade, he was not really being talked about as a number 2 pick, but if they had drafted Dwayne Wade, he would have been like a perfect 6-man as a rookie. He would have been like the perfect guy once like Rip Hamilton was no longer like on the team or no longer viable. It would like carry that kind of burgeoning dynasty forward. Like the Pistons had a good run. They won a championship. They made the finals the next year. They were like consistently a good team in the East. But had they picked any of the next 3 guys rather than Darko Milicic, would have worked out a lot better. So
yeah.
Anybody else on your list that you feel like mentioning?
Yeah, I had a few other random guys. I had Gord Kluzak from 1982 in the NHL.
Had him on my board, yeah.
A dude who, I don't know, there was some other pretty good guys. He was a dude that injuries derailed him, but
other good defensemen too.
Yeah, I mean Scott Stevens, Phil Housley, Ron Sutter, and then down the line you had Pat Verbeek, Dave Anderchuk, Ray Ferraro, Doug Gilmour, all in this draft.
Good draft, yeah.
And I think this is like even one at one point that I think around this time I'd mentioned you potentially looking at this one, but he was one I had for the NHL. I had Yakupov on there just because.
Yeah, same.
He's talked about, I think, some of the other obvious ones we don't talk about, or we didn't talk about maybe almost because they're talked about too much in terms of like NFL bus. Ryan Leaf, Akili Smith.
Yeah, I had Akili Smith on my list. I actually didn't have Ryan Leaf basically just because kind of as a protest of the constantly talking about him relative to Peyton Manning. But
yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, like, obviously I looked at other people's kind of draft bus lists as ways to get started, some of that. And like Trey Lance is making a bunch of lists already, I've noticed. And I'm
he crossed my mind. I'm not quite there. I did draft somebody from 2021, so it wouldn't be ridiculous for me to.
Yeah.
But also part of the problem is that if they hadn't drafted Trey Lance, the Niners were probably going to draft Mac Jones, who also would have been a terrible pick. Probably not as terrible, but like not great.
Yeah, I mean, NFL, I think, I thought about like Steve Emtman at number 1 overall in the NFL, like not a great pick. Courtney Brown, another fun one, or Justin Gilbert, if you want to stick with Brown's draft picks in the first round.
So Justin Gilbert was actually the same year as Johnny Manziel too, which
and Johnny.
I think there is sort of like people have this kind of idea with quarterbacks and also quarterbacks that won the Heisman, because I saw a few lists mentioning Tebow, and it's like Tebow was like a late first round pick and he won a playoff game. What do you yeah, I agree, Tim Tebow not like an all pro or whatever, but like the idea that you're take anybody who was drafted that low is just like you're just being a hater at that point. One name that I wanted to mention that was not a super high pick, and that's why I ended up not taking him, but he was in that vaunted 2003 NHL draft, Hugh Jessamine, who was a draft pick of the New York Rangers, and basically, by all accounts, was drafted because he was really big. He was nicknamed Huge Specimen, as opposed to Hugh Jessamine, and he was from the New York City area, so they're like, oh, we're going to draft the local kid. He played in 2 total NHL games. The next 2 picks were Dustin Brown and Brent Seabrook, who were both like NHL All-Stars, who like I think both had periods of being way overrated, but still much better players than Hugh Jessamine.
Yeah.
And within 10 picks, you had like Zach Parise, Ryan Getzlaff, Brent Burns. These are like near Hall of Fame level players. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Patrick Stefan, another fun number 1 overall pick. A guy that, I mean, to be fair, to be a draft bust and have what Patrick Stefan is maybe best remembered for being his missing an open net and then the team coming down and scoring the tying goal is one of like. Do yourself a favor and watch that YouTube video if you've never seen it.
Is that the single most like ignominious like single moment from any of these players? It might be. It is. Off field, obviously. Lawrence Phillips had some moments that are more shameful than whiffing on an empty net, but
it certainly seems the most, at least, encapsulating of one's status.
Yeah.
Of that. I mean, it's but that was a fun one. The 99 NHL draft is a good one. The two players taken after him were brothers that turned out to be pretty good. So
identical twin brothers, yes.
Identical twin brothers from Sweden.
Yes, the Sedins.
Yes.
A couple other picks that I wanted to kind of shout out. Danny Goodwin was the number 1 overall pick in the 1971 Major League Draft. He did not sign. He was then the number 1 overall pick 4 years later. He did sign. Ended up kind of being a mediocre like first baseman / DH when he was drafted as a catcher. Apparently went on to a productive career in like private sector jobs. That's what I kept reading about. But yeah, nothing worth warrant.
Hey, make the most.
So I did not realize this until I started researching this, but the number 3 pick in the 1979 MLB draft was former NFL quarterback Jay Schrader, who was like a fine NFL quarterback, but did not sign. I thought it was funny because he was drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays, who at that point also had Danny Ainge as their third baseman of the future, which did not work out. But the idea of them just like loading up on 2 sports guys that eventually go to the other sport, it's kind of funny. Ainge was a lower pick though, so he was never really on my radar. But
yeah, I think that's most of what I got in terms of guys.
Yeah.
So
all due respect to like LaRue Martin and Scott Sissons, a few other guys like that, but there's a lot of bad picks out there, and who knows? Maybe what's his face? Like JJ McCarthy will be joining this list soon, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean Jaden Daniels.
I believe in Jaden Daniels, though. I don't believe in JJ McCarthy.
I mean, I don't trust anybody from Michigan. I don't feel like, but
yeah, Michigan.
Except for our one friend who's a Michigan fan, even though he's not from Michigan, I trust him.
I can't think of any good NFL players out of the University of Michigan, particularly quarterbacks who might be able to help you win a Super Bowl or 7. But anyway, Tom Brady went to Michigan.
Chad Henne.
Yeah, he won that one playoff game for the Chiefs.
He sure did.
Let's go over the drafts so that I don't have to add this part in post like I've had to the last couple times. I keep forgetting. Jason, his picks are Jamarcus Russell, Michael Olowokandi, Craig Oden, Brian Taylor, Rick DiPietro, Charles Rogers, Sam Bowie, Nicholas Basagno. Is that right?
Basagno, yeah.
Okay, cool. Justin Blackman and Kwame Brown. My picks were Lawrence Phillips, Hasheen Thabit, Steve Chilcott, Anthony Bennett, Jason Smith, Alexander Daig, Charlie Collier, Tony Mandarich, Travis Lee, and Darko Milicic. That is the drafts. Anything you want to say? Any?
No. Rate us on Spotify. Get us going up there.
Yeah.
Follow us on Twitter at Draft Day Pod. Follow me at Draft Day Dad Shaw. And shoot us ideas. I'm liking that with the original idea being to redraft sports drafts. I kind of like this venturing into other territory. It makes it a little more fun in doing research because just looking at one draft gets. I think we've noticed with some of our episodes, if you do too many of those, like you peter out a conversation about halfway through our picks. So,
which if you like shorter episodes might be good for you, but
that's just share it with your friends or don't. Yeah. It really doesn't matter.
Do whatever you feel like.
Yeah, but we thank you for listening, John. Any parting words from you?
Yeah, you can, I guess, follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever, at JohnJF125. We're recording this on opening day of baseball. If you like baseball writing, you can go to stlbullpen.com, follow them/me on Twitter at stlbullpen. And that's pretty much it. And oh boy, recording isn't up. Huh. April Fools.
Ah!
All right.
Oh,
Bye, everybody.
that was a good one.
Bye.